Hello, hello. So the goal of our lecture today is to do a deep dive on Renaissance art. So we're really going to zoom in on that last question on your chunk sheet. So what we're going to do today is we're going to explain the connection between Renaissance art and humanism, which we talked about last lecture, and then we're going to explain some of the key characteristics of Renaissance art. So before we dive into that, I'd like you to just observe these two images for a second, excuse me, and then describe any similarities that you notice and then any differences. And as you're looking at these images, make sure you look at the title, the artist, and the date of these images because they'll give you some clues. All right, so one thing that you may have noticed, these are images of the same subject. So both of these pictures are actually of the Virgin Mary. So they're pictures, and baby Jesus. So they're pictures of Christian subjects, right? So again, highlighting that even though secularism was one of the key principles of the Renaissance, it wasn't this total break with Christianity. Still, sometimes artists painted Christian subjects. So one difference, though, pretty obviously, right, is the fact that this image on the left, which is a medieval image if you looked at the date, and this image on the right, which is a Renaissance image if you looked at the date and if the name Da Vinci rang a bell, obviously the image on the left is much less realistic and much more stylized than the image on the right. The image on the right looks like it was painted using real models. That looks like a real woman and a real baby, right? Whereas on the left, I don't know about you, but that doesn't look like a baby to me. That looks like a shrunken down adult. All right, so let's do some contextualization again. Let's talk about sort of the political and social context in which Renaissance art emerged. So in the 1400s, Florence was the center of Renaissance art. And remember, that family that we associate with Florence is the Medicis, that wealthy non-noble. So again, no king gave them a title, no king gave them land. They became wealthy and powerful through their own actions. This family was very, very important because they played a really important role in not only commissioning scholarships, the works of those philosophers we talked about last lecture, but also in commissioning art. So some of the key artists from this time are Giotto, Botticelli, who is my favorite Renaissance artist, and then Brunelleschi, who was also an architect. Then, in the 1500s, the center of art and power shifted to Rome. So remember, that's in the Papal States. And because Rome is in the Papal States, it is the center of the Roman Catholic Church, as the name suggests. So we see the main commissioner of art during this time is going to not be the Medicis, but instead it's going to be Pope Alexander VI. And this period is also known as the High Renaissance. And these are all the Ninja Turtle names. So Da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael are some of the names that we need to know here. I don't think Da Vinci's a Ninja Turtle. I don't know. Was it Michelangelo? I'm not really sure. Raphael? I didn't watch the Ninja Turtles. All right, so what's that connection between Renaissance art and humanism? So like philosophy and scholarship, Renaissance art was influenced by that idea, because it was inspired by Greek and Roman techniques and themes. And we'll be looking at that more in a future slide. And then again, it also emphasized secularism to an extent and this idea of individuality. We'll be looking at that as well. All right, and then before we get into those specific characteristics, let's identify some key terms. Make sure you have these in your notes if you don't already. I'm going to butcher their pronunciation. And the first one is chiaroscuro, and that's the use of dark and light colors to create the illusion of depth. So you see in this image here, that is, again, the Virgin Mary. So we're seeing religious themes again. And she is learning about her pregnancy with baby Jesus from the archangel here, right? But we see this face is highlighted in light. Virgin Mary is highlighted in this light. And then the rest of the background is very dark, so it creates this really dramatic contrast. Another term that we need to know is sfumato, and this is the use of blurry and soft lines. So we see here, this is the Mona Lisa, a very famous Renaissance painting, and you can see it has kind of like this blurry, dreamlike quality. All right, so here are some key features of Renaissance art. So Greek and Roman influence, realism, perspective, geometric arrangement of figures, an emphasis on the individual, and artists as personalities or celebrities. And we'll go through each one of these in turn. All right, Greek and Roman influence is our first characteristic. So again, this goes back to that idea of humanism, right? Because humanism was all about using the works of the Greeks and the Romans to develop these new ideas during the Renaissance. So Renaissance art focused on classical techniques and forms. For example, an emphasis on symmetry and balance. It also depicted classical subjects, people from Greek and Roman mythology. So this here, by the way, heads up, lots of nudity in this PowerPoint. This here is a painting by Botticelli, and it depicts Venus, who was a Roman goddess, also Aphrodite, if that's her Greek name. So that is a depiction of her birth. Sculpture also imitated Greco-Roman sculpture. That's how I actually have a picture on a future slide of that. And then architecture used classical forms like domes and columns. So this here is a picture of the Duomo, a really famous Renaissance building in Florence. All right, another key feature of Renaissance art was realism. So again, more nudity, very realistic nudity, and this is the David, a famous Renaissance sculpture. So artists, in order to achieve this realistic depiction of the human figure, they used models, so real-life people, including sometimes cadavers, which was fun. And this also was an imitation of Greek and Roman art. So this sculpture here, the David, very, very sort of typical sort of Roman or Greek style, right? All right, one thing I do want to point out though, artists were not always successful. So there's a great Tumblr, if you Google it, called like Ugly Renaissance Babies or something like that. Obviously you can't always find baby models, so Renaissance artists sometimes kind of winged it like medieval artists did, and then you get babies that look like that. All right, another key feature was perspective or linear perspective. So this is something you might have actually learned in an art class. So what linear perspective is a method for depicting 3D scenes in 2D. So making 2D images look three-dimensional. So this image is actually an image of various Greek philosophers who did not all live at the same time, just all thrown in together. So it's some artistic fan fiction here. But what's cool about this picture is that it has this vanishing point somewhere around here, and then it kind of has this linear perspective. So if you imagine all these lines being drawn towards that vanishing point, uses it to make it look like you're actually standing in this 3D hall. All right, another key feature was the geometric arrangement of figures. So this has to do with, I mentioned that one of the techniques in Greek and Roman art was this idea of like symmetry and balance. So one of the ways Renaissance artists achieved that is they use something called a pyramid structure. So all the figures are kind of arranged in this sort of pyramid form. So you can see here again, this is that Da Vinci Madonna again. So the Virgin Mary, she kind of looks like a triangle here. We got baby Jesus, he's his own little triangle here. So again, using that geometry, using these mathematical forms. All right. Next is an emphasis on the individual. So again, this connects back to that idea of humanism, because remember, one of the big parts of humanism was to emphasize the importance of individuals, right? So it's not only about individuals' ability to create knowledge, it's also depicting individuals in art as sort of like this special, unique thing, right? So we saw that Renaissance art depicted religious subjects, it depicted subjects from Greek and Roman mythology, but it also depicted real people, right? So one of the things that wealthy patrons like the Medicis and the popes did was they commissioned artists to not only paint religious figures or mythological figures, they also wanted pictures of themselves, right? Because how else can you show off that you're rich and fabulous? You get people to paint nice pictures of you. So this is a picture of some wealthy patrons here. And notice that it's very realistic, right? They're kind of drawn, or rather painted, warts and all. This guy's got one heck of a nose, right? But they look like real people. All right, and kind of related to that idea is this idea of artists as personalities or celebrities. So it used to be, back in the Middle Ages, artists were really not that important. They were seen as kind of like craftspeople, and they didn't necessarily sign their work, they didn't make a big deal out of themselves. But in the Renaissance, we almost get this idea that artists are kind of like branding themselves. So they're not just sort of like workers anymore, they're special, there's something unique about them. So one thing that they did is they started to sign their work. So this is a sculpture by Michelangelo called the Pieta. It's really cool. You can't see the whole thing in this picture, obviously, but you'll notice here that it's been signed. And another sort of interesting feature of this aspect of Renaissance art is that artists actually publish biographies of themselves, or other people publish biographies of themselves. So that just kind of highlights that artists, again, they're not just seen as sort of random people in the world. There's something special about them. There's this kind of genius quality to them. So people want to learn more about them in their lives. All right, well, that about covers Renaissance art. Thank you so much for watching.